Chapter 3. Memories. Jonathan Taylor Smith began his first 12 years of life growing up in a small city. To Jonathan, his parents didn't seem rich, but neither were his parents struggling to make ends meet. He had a baby sister just under a year old named Mary, who he loved and adored. He did everything he could to help his mother and father to look after her. His mother's name was Zora. She had the magic talent for her to be a seer and an empath. She used her ability as a seer to tell her customers' fortunes, used her more powerful empathic abilities to know when someone was lying, to assist in diagnosing ailments, and she was also a competent healer. Jonathan's father was named Timothy, but everyone just called him Tim. He was a powerful practitioner in the healing arts and white magic, and both his parents used their talents to make a living to help other people in need. Neither Jonathan nor Mary seemed to have inherited any significant magical talents. Mary was too young for her magic to manifest itself yet, and Jonathan it seemed that he had only inherited a smidgen of his mother's seer's ability and even less of her empathic talent. He had no control over his magic, and it only worked sporadically. Johnny's most useful skill didn't involve magic, just the healing arts through mundane means. He could never be as good as his parents, though he tried. Yet he was competent enough to assist his parents to sew up wounds, set broken bones, prevent infections, and make simple herbal potions and salves for common ailments by the time he was 10. Both his parents did what they could to educate him about the desert they lived in and about other places in the world. They also taught him reading, writing, basic mathematics, biology, botany, home economics, how to run their business, and even magical theory. Though they knew that their son could not do any significant magic, they thought it wouldn't hurt for him to at least have a working knowledge. That way he would recognize when magic was being used, what sort, and what was the best defense if needed. They also thought it might be useful for him to know just in case he had children that were magically talented, so he could at least teach them himself. Then in his 12th year, his father's connections at the royal palace told him of a job opening there for just the sort of practitioners he and his wife were. Tim called in a favor and had a good word put in for him directly to the king's ear. The king hired him sight unseen. He had heard of the Smith family reputation as excellent healers and fortune-tellers. Delighted to get the best job opportunity of their lives, Johnny's mother and father packed up shop and hired a cargo runner to help them move to the capital city. What seemed like a good idea at the time turned into a tragic mistake. The cargo runner was a violent thief and a slave trader. Much of what Johnny's parents owned had value, so he thought to steal all of it. The trip to the capital city of Nazarene was about 150 miles along a well-maintained dirt road. About halfway there, the man transporting them pretended to make a wrong turn and got them hopelessly lost in the middle of nowhere. Zora abruptly sensed there was something horribly wrong and demanded that they backtrack to where they got lost and try to reach the right path from there. Suddenly, without warning, the sand ship's captain whipped around and shot both Jonathan's father and mother before they had fully realized the danger and before they had a chance to make a defensive spell. The slaver had no use for magical practitioners as powerful as they were. It made them too dangerous and impossible to control. Mary, who had been sleeping in her basket by her mother's feet, was startled awake by the loud bangs of the driver's gun. Jonathan was too shocked and confused to fully understand what just happened. He sat frozen, unable to move in his state of shock. The driver pointed the gun at Mary and snapped, "Shut that brat up or I'll kill her too." Fearing for his sister's life, Jonathan made himself move. He picked her up and did his best to comfort her as he sat between his dead parents. The driver turned back around and resumed traveling toward his true destination. Johnny soon quieted Mary, rocking her and singing quietly to her the way she liked. Part of him wanted to scream and cry too, but he kept his emotions under control for Mary's sake. A few minutes later, the driver arrived at his hidden camp deep in the desert where the city people rarely ventured. There was a small gang of ruffians waiting to help him inspect the cargo and dispose of the two bodies. Jonathan, still carrying his little sister, was hauled out first and shoved in the direction of a young, haggard, and broken-spirited slave girl that couldn't have been more than 2 years older than himself. Jonathan was ordered to do as he was told, or his sister would be shot right before his eyes. Jonathan did as he was bidden and let the girl take charge. Everything about the filthy girl leaked sorrow and a vague sense of madness to Jonathan's weak empathic talent. She took him to her small and much-patched tent, dully told him to go inside, and she would get the baby's things. He did as he was told, sitting down on the shabby carpets and tatty blankets that lined the bottom of her tent. He rocked and hummed to Mary quietly, feeling like he needed to cry himself, but unable to, numbed to the core by his state of shock. The image of the cargo driver turning around and shooting his parents, the spray of blood that just barely missed splattering him, Jonathan didn't want to see it anymore, but the picture would not go away. A few minutes later, the black-haired slave girl with the haunted eyes came back with Mary's things and a fresh small cut on her lower lip. It didn't bleed much, and she paid it no mind. She seemed to be accustomed to pain. Mary began to fuss and whimper, and Jonathan rocked and stroked her head in an effort to keep her quiet. The girl looked at Mary with sad longing, then up to Jonathan. "She's hungry, and she'll need to be changing soon. I can do that. My baby's gone. But I can still nurse her little sister." Jonathan didn't want to hand his sister over to the girl, her hair matted, the warm blue dress too loose on her frame because she was a little too thin. But he could see no alternative. Mary had to eat. Jonathan gave the girl his sister, and she subconsciously pulled down the loose fabric of her dress collar and exposed her full swollen breast to Mary's questing mouth. Mary fussed a bit because the girl was trying to feed her was not her mother, but with some gentle coaxing, Mary finally latched on and suckled. Over the next 7 weeks, Jonathan learned the girl's name was Jasmine, and she had a son that was taken from her not 3 days before Jonathan had been captured. Her son had been sold to a nice but less than honest couple who couldn't have babies of their own. They even had a wet nurse already in their employ in anticipation of the adoption of their new son. Jasmine told him that she believed that he would have a better life than the one she could provide. At least he wouldn't be a slave. She said that to him with the conviction of someone trying to convince herself what she wanted to believe was true, but she felt no real hopes of such a good life for her lost son. He often held Jasmine at night to comfort her. Their master, the cargo driver named Ishmael, insisted they share Jasmine's tent to keep Mary quiet, he said. Jonathan had a teeny nagging feeling that Ishmael secretly hoped that Jonathan would eventually take advantage of Jasmine and get her with child again. Jonathan never thought of Jasmine as someone he wanted to have sex with. He was too young, she was too old for him, and he thought of her more as a patient that needed comforting. They did become friends, and they did their best to help each other look after Mary, and did the camp chores the men demanded of them. On the 7th day of the 8th week, a small band of slave traders that had quite a few slaves ready to be marketed in their number came and visited it for a while. Jonathan could hear both Ishmael's people and the slave traders talking in a language he never heard before. He didn't know why, but the visitor terrified him more than Ishmael's rough gang did, with their orders mixed with cruel insults and hard cuffs to his ears and arms to motivate him, and even worse beatings if he protested being hit or didn't do what he was ordered quickly enough. They talked and bartered over an hour as Jasmine with Mary in her sling was made to sit with them and Jonathan was to serve wine and stew. They kept looking at Jasmine and Mary, gesturing to them. She sat there with her head down, rocking a bit, more in distress than to comfort little Mary. After a while, Jonathan sensed a deal had been struck, and everyone stood up smiling and grasped each other's hands. Then, to Jonathan's horror, the lead slaver took hold of Jasmine's upper arm and pulled her roughly to her feet towards the cart where the rest of his slaves were being pinned. "No!" Jonathan screamed and tried to run to them, trying to stop the unresisting Jasmine and his baby sister from being taken away from him. Ishmael punched his face hard enough to knock him down and made black spots dance before his eyes. "Shut up, you stupid brat!" Ishmael snarled as Jonathan helplessly watched his sister and his friend be carried off in the ox cart. He had no tears, not since his parents were killed. Fresh heartbreak, anger, fury, helplessness, and finally a quiet sort of hateful rage. Jonathan stood and mentally vowed revenge to get his sister and Jasmine back if he could. He knew he couldn't do it today, maybe not tomorrow, but one day he would fulfill his vow, even if it took a lifetime. Another month passed, and for Jonathan every day was colored with a quiet, dull rage. People came and went. Sometimes Ishmael would take off with the sand ship and come back with more stolen cargo. Occasionally he brought stolen children, and Jonathan did what he could to comfort and help them adjust to their new life, but they never stayed more than a week before they were sold off. One day, as he was getting water from a nearby spring just under the rock formation they camped by, Jonathan saw the biggest, healthiest, and most beautiful rat he had ever seen staring down at him from the ledge. In the city, the magical desert rats were a nuisance, and Jonathan almost picked up a rock and threw it at the cat-sized pest. Then he thought better of it. If the camp became infested with rats, maybe Ishmael and his gang would be distracted enough for him to escape, giving him a chance to look for his sister and Jasmine. "Who are you, boy?" the golden rat asked quietly as she regarded him curiously. "Do you need help?" Jonathan jumped in surprise and nearly dropped the pitcher he was carrying. He had never heard a rat talk before, and he didn't know they could. "You told Goldie?" Jonathan asked, picking a pet name for the color of her fur. He knew it was silly, but giving people, and especially animals he didn't know, temporary nicknames had been a habit for as long as he could remember. "Shush! Keep your voice down!" whispered the rat squeakily. "Of course I can talk. Unlike the lesser rats, all of us can speak human if we want to. I just need to know if you're here of your own free will. Answer my question." "My name is Jonathan. I'm a prisoner," he answered with a heavy heart. He didn't know why the rat cared, and he didn't believe that one little creature could help him anyway. Yet he sensed there was more to this encounter than first appeared. So he answered her fully and with complete honesty. Ishmael killed my parents and sold my baby sister and my friend Jasmine because she was a wet nurse. Can you help me please escape and find them? Not by myself, but I bring help, the rat responded. Whiskers twitching, she cocked her head thoughtfully for a moment and added, I didn't have a name. I think you found one for me. Thank you, boy. Go fetch water and act normal. Help is coming. Be patient. With that, she just up and vanished to Jonathan's blinking amazement. Not like she ran away out of sight almost too fast to see, but just gone. Poof! As if she had never been there. Jonathan did as the rat bid him. He saw no reason why he should act any different anyway. What could a talking rat do to help him escape? She could be lying for all he knew. He thought of his encounter often the rest of the day as he fetched, carried, and maintained the camp. In spite of his doubts, Goldie had given him a faint glimmer of hope that shone through the omnipresent grief and numbness and helpless rage and pure burning hatred that dominated his mind ever since his parents had been murdered. Jonathan was a little afraid of that hope, but the persistent nagging feeling, like a gut instinct, kept telling him that he could have faith in Goldie's word. Jonathan seldom spoke beyond a yes, master, to his captors, so keeping his strange encounter with a big and oddly beautiful rat was a secret was not difficult. As the sun set and the night came moonless and brightly starred, it was customary that he was made to stay up and serve the dozen men their wine, bread, and spring water and stew made from whatever they could catch, steal, or gather from the surrounding landscape. He was allowed to eat the leftovers once he had cleaned up after them and they had finished and retired. He never touched the wine. He didn't like the taste of it, and he saw what it did to the men when they drank too much. So he drew himself some more water from the spring and a battered pewter pitcher he was permitted to use. Then he scraped the remains of the cold stew into a chip ceramic bowl and grabbed a half-eaten loaf of bread, bringing his meal to his tent and leaving it there. He returned to scrub clean the cook pot and dishes with the water and sand by the spring and made sure the cook fire was banked for the night so it could be started again in the morning. Only then did he retire to his shabby tent in his filthy clothes and dirty bedding of rugs and ratty blankets. He ate and drank quickly, not really tasting his food and too tired to care how bad it was. The camp cook was not very good at his job. When he finished, he was careful to wash his dish and spoon in the spring before returning to his tent to sleep. He learned the hard way about small animals' attraction to food smells if the scraps were left there for too long. Most proved to be merely annoying. Others were venomous or had other nasty defenses that proved to be quite painful if the little beasts were mishandled. He tried to sleep. He was so tired. But the shining hope, faint though it was, kept him thinking of possible escape and finding both his friend and sister. There was a soft, scuffling noise just outside his tent. Johnson grabbed a stick he used to gently drive off the pesky invaders. He never killed or harmed the creatures that investigated his tent. "Jonathan?" Goldie's high-pitched whispering voice called inquiringly. Surprised, he put down his stick and pushed back the tent flap just enough to let the shadowy form of the rat into his tent. "I wasn't sure if you were really coming back," he whispered to her as he sat back down in the middle of the floor. "I keep my word," Goldie whispered back, almost insulted that he would dare to doubt her, "especially to one who named me. I am your rat now, and you belong to me." He was at a loss as how to respond to her whispered declaration. He wasn't sure he wanted a rat, even as pretty and as intelligent as this one. Goldie then said, "You need to follow me. My friends are here, and you will be safer elsewhere. They are already on the move. Come with me silently as you can. Take nothing." Jonathan had nothing he wanted to take. Everything in his old life had been brutally stripped away. But he had other worries. "Ishmael posts guards around the camp. They'll see me if I try to escape." "They're dead," Goldie said matter-of-factly. "The others will be dead, too. I was sent to lead you away so they didn't have to worry about protecting you while they kill these monsters. Come on, let's get going. No more delays. Hurry up!" Jonathan was still doubtful, causing him to hesitate in spite of her urgency. After so long of being enslaved, the prospect of freedom sounded too good to be true. Goldie bared her sharp rat teeth at him and snapped in a firm, motherly tone in her high, sweet, squeaky voice. "Jonathan! Don't make me have to bite you to get you going, boy. I will not hesitate to draw blood." That he believed, so he quietly jumped up and followed her out into the night. He followed her shadowy form through the camp and into the desert. Goldie was an adept guide, leading him across the surest footing and keeping them both in the shadows as much as possible. When he lost sight of her, he could whisper her name, and she would softly squeak back at him so he could find her by sound. Soon it became apparent they were heading for a large boulder the size of an elephant that lay in a small depression among a light scattering of low scrub. There was a small man, or perhaps a woman, not much taller than he, dressed all in black, so only the faint reflection of her eyes could be seen as she sat on the big stone. Jonathan suddenly realized whoever it was didn't look like the usual guards Ishmael posted as they drew closer. Goldie squeaked and the figure waved in greeting as the stone uncoiled itself, stood on 4 legs, and readjusted her huge bird wings on her back. Jonathan stopped dead in his tracks. Now that the creature was standing, he finally recognized her for what she was. She was a feathered dragon. They had a fearsome reputation and were favored by gladiator stable masters when they could capture them and force them to do battle in the arena, which wasn't often. They were nearly impossible to catch and control. "It's all right," Goldie squeaked and patted his leg with her hand encouragingly. "This is Bronwyn, and her rider is the Lady Chief Ling." Ling slid down from the Bronwyn's withers with a faint sound of rattling buckles that were used to hook onto the dragon's riding straps. Jonathan saw the faint flash of a long steel blade tucked into her rider's belt. He didn't know who to be more afraid of, the woman or the dragon. Ling said gently in a low, comforting voice as she took his hand and pulled him towards their dragon. "She won't hurt you, Jonathan. Hurry up, we need to go." The camp was still nearby. They had only been walking for 10 minutes, so it was not difficult for Jonathan to hear the sudden cries and the banging of the pot they hung as a makeshift alarm bell next to Ishmael's tent. A gunshot rang out, then only shouts and one agonized scream from one of the men in the camp that was abruptly cut off. A thunderous roar split the air, a flash of belched fireball hitting a tent and burning it to the ground. Another dragon was in the camp, helping Ling's people kill Ishmael and his gang. They didn't have a chance anyone in the camp was to live through the night. Bronwyn had followed Ling as she approached Jonathan. She came up to them and turned sideways and rumbled quietly, looking at them over her shoulder and standing there with her well-developed hind leg back a bit, so she could better expose her underbelly to them. Ling coaxed Jonathan with Goldie's encouragement to get under the dragon. This confused him until he saw Ling's use her gloved hand to pull down the elastic opening of the large marsupial-like pouch. He wasn't too sure about getting in there, but Goldie threatened to bite him again if he didn't hurry. With Ling giving him a leg up and Bronwyn doing her best to make it easier for him, Jonathan managed to crawl into the dragon's pouch and tried to make himself comfortable as possible. He discovered it was quite warm and snug, and with Bronwyn's scales smooth and pleasant to the touch. There was enough of an opening at the entrance of the pouch to let in plenty of air, so he had no trouble breathing. He could hear her breathing, the faint gurgle of her innards working, and he could just barely hear the thump-thump of her heartbeat. It felt oddly secure in there, and it was the first time he felt safe since his parents were murdered. Suddenly, a warm, furry body was next to him. It was Goldie making herself comfortable to keep him company during their flight. He hugged Goldie to himself and kissed her on the head just before he felt a sudden lurch as Bronwyn leapt into the sky, flying away to where he knew not. The knowledge that Ishmael would soon be dead, or was already dead, made him feel avenged. That coupled with the first real kindness he had in months, a sense of complete safety in Bronwyn's pouch, Goldie affectionately hugging and kissing him back, the hard thing that kept him from mourning the loss of his family, finally melted away. Finally, he was able to cry and to begin healing.